So we're joined with Subhosit now and also Misha. Subhosit, you were just telling me about you were looking into conlangs.
Yeah.
Tell us about this.
So Conlang's actually a way of it's a written language which is not generally made by the civilization or anything. It's just constructed language. It's just short for constructed languages basically. And people find out interesting rules of grammar and tries to create concepts and that could be as well be used for complete conversations. The interesting part got me that got me interested in conlang is that the ideas and concepts could be very non-linear, and also one aspect that caught my attention was UNLWS, where the writing system is two-dimensional, which is similar to hieroglyphics, but you can think of like letters are connecting in terms of a graph-like things where there are nodes and things can connect to each other, and it could mean different things under different contexts. So you have to follow.
But I'm noticed it's not actually two-dimensional. It's graph-based.
It's like a non-linear graph-based kind of thing.
So explain that a little more. So English, we sort of read it left to right.
Left to right.
Some languages go the other direction. Japanese goes down.
Yeah.
Is this both?
Arabic goes. Yeah.
Is this both?
It's not a grid-like structure. You can fit it into a grid-like, but it has like you can draw circles and embed like a higher concept with a symbol and then embed smaller concepts. So it doesn't have an alphabet for a syllable. It has an alphabet for fish. And fish under different contexts might mean something you're talking about, ocean or things like that. So they have a more non-linear writing system rather than breaking up into syllables and phonetics, where you start building up objects, naming them, and things like that.
Is it made out of sounds, or is it made out of sort of ideograms?
It is currently. It's just a written language. It's not. Doesn't have.
There's no way to speak it.
There's no way to speak it. But there's another language which is called the shortest language in the world, which is called Toki pona, and it has, I think, 256 characters as total alphabets.
Words.
Total words.
Yeah.
Total words, and that's it. That's what they use to describe the language.
That's convenient.
That's very cool, and that's why I was looking into. There are other languages. Which is not Toki pona, but reminds me of ancient sigils and that Vikings used to put their circles and patterns in them. It's very.
Toki pona. When was that created?
It was created by Sonja Lang back in 2007. It is like she started out with only 125 characters, but then it got expanded to more words.
Words, like a dictionary.
Like a dictionary, and it's one of the most popular conlangs of many other. And I think Dr.
Can that one be spoken?
It's spoken. It has its own community. People are speaking. Not only speaking, they are making songs in it. They're making poem. There are translated work of the whole. I think the Wizard of Oz completely translated in Toki pona. So yeah, it's one of the most vibing communities. Unlike UNLWS, but yeah, I've been, and Toki pona has also many other variants coming out of. So they have like the tablets that you would see in Chinese communication. So they would arrange the tablets in like a three-dimensional configuration, and it has its own name. So it's like a written system for Toki pona. It's a three-dimensional language. So you can do a lot more things, but one thing I think Toki pona would be useful thinking about conlangs is like how grammar is symmetrical, or how grammar can be condensed, or how rules could be expanded, and we can cheat in terms of not always thinking about phonetics and alphabets. Just go to fish, because how often we think about phonetics and things like that. So can thinking about non-linear way of representing language could rescue us in some sort of this expanse of millions of parameters that comes into LLMs.
Do you think this is like chess or checkers or Sudoku, sort of a brilliant intellectual activity? Or could we do something like engineering, medicine, law, practically or usefully using these kinds of things like Toki pona?
So I think Toki pona actually started out like a spiritual kind of way. What's the simplistic way of human expression? How to make it very as simple as the simplest level of human expression. So it has some sort of spiritual side. It can be taken up as a hobby and other things. But I have been thinking about when Andrei Karpathy dropped this 2-hour video on his website about tokenization. And I used to think in my mind, what about Tokiponization? Instead of thinking about words as tokens, we can think about words in its Tokiponized version of vector, where there's a non-linear connections. It's not just like which word, it's not like a bag of words kind of scenario, where in a sentence I'm always looking its closest neighbor and what I'm pairing it up with. But we can think about as human language expressions, which words kind of find its meaning in a spectrum of other meanings dancing around, not just pairs. And it could condense down a lot of information in a non-linear perspective. It's a throw in the woods. It's not very clear cut, but I think conlang would have a very enormous impact in terms of more of semantic reasoning and what makes us human, pretty much like the feeling aspect of it.
So, well, I don't know how familiar you are with unlaws.
No, tell me more. I think I've seen it, but
So, unlaws, the thing that really is craziest to me is that words are essentially shapes, like calligraphic shapes, but a fundamental part of the language is the artistry that you put into it.
Yes, and you can actually make a fractal out of it. So you can have a big word that represent, and you can actually make a smaller word that's reverbing inside it.
would this be like qualifiers on the word, or just like emotional,
Well,
context?
it's an additional layer of expression.
Yeah.
It's calligraphy, but with some sort of semantic meaning. It's like poetry as art, if you will.
So
Yeah.
like verbal English supports this. In other words, I can speak angrily, or
Yeah.
and then in other words, I can put a layer of emotional context when I pronounce the words. Do you think that's that in a graphical way, or would it support it?
It does support it.
So-
In fact, it's fundamental.
So not just emotional context, but adding additional meaning.
And artistry. Like,
So I don't know what kind of expressions they put in terms of, because I have been only looking at trying to understand the grammar as of now, but how much they have vocabulary encompassing emotions and things like that, I do not know. But they have translated poetries for the Francis, I forgot, like the John Francis, like a prayer.
yeah.
So
And
they have
the Lord's
translated
Prayer
that.
as well.
Yeah. They have many translated works. So I think they have a scope for that, and I have to look into more of the structure. What kind of more importance that comes into it. But for example, there's like one thing I found out, like there was a structure of fish, and then there was like a loop that tries the symbolization of eat, and then there's like another character that qualifies the fish that kind of joins as a graph on the fish, what kind of fish it is. It's big, and who is eating? I'm eating. So it's like me, then the character. There's no qualifier for I, me, or things like that. It's just like a self-referential object sitting over there with the loop that kind of qualifies what kind of relation I have, which is a verb, and then it has a relation that this is the object that's getting eaten. So it kind of parses, like we think about language in terms of a relation, like it's a verbal relation or a qualifying relation. Things like that are very like, they took that aspects of that language and made it in terms of like getting rid of specific alphabets. They kind of looks into the specific grammar.
Do you think learning this language, or even learning about this language, has changed how you think?
I I haven't gotten too much deeply into learning the language, but I have a feeling that languages do alter the way you think and gives you the capacity to. There's a fundamental thing about ourselves that I've been exploring called thought forms and the way you think.
Annie Bassler, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I think it's Charles W. Lee.
Yeah, and then with Annie, they wrote it together.
And Annie Besant. Yeah.
Besant, that's right.
Some of their the earliest works that have been put out are by them. Charles W.
There's some interesting sort of graphical representations of music in that.
Yeah, there's like when you hear music or thinking about music, how your mind is thinking about it could be like an aura or things like that that could be perceived in terms of what I call the clairvoyance, or there's another term for it. I think remote viewing. But let's roll back from psychic elements to common things that like there are aspects the way we think, and it has its own shape and how it affects, and it's kind of fundamental in terms of like as it goes back to as far as computation and computing, the way we talk, it arises into like more computational level, like when cells are interacting, it's like there's no language. It looks like a chemical reaction, but once enough chemicals and complexities are formed, then there's another form to it, and then higher forms arises, multicellularity, and then from chemistry we move on to communications, and then communications takes its, which is beyond like human perception, because now we are becoming a part of the system, and we are arising from parts, and then we are again finding ourselves in the parts, and then you can think about like how you shape this interactions in terms of what elements you pick in the computation. For example, you were talking about moving from just our one bit system computing. What is it called? I forgot.
Bit flip is one of them.
Bit flip. Yes. So we are moving from like where we used to have like normal computation, but then we are moving towards other computing system.
So you've done a lot of work in cellular automata.
Yeah.
And in that game of life, for example, we get these gliders, these little critters that go across.
Game of life, we get these critters, exactly.
Do you think that thought forms are sort of like the critters on the grid of our mind?
Exactly. So that's what I was exactly referring to in a very broad sense, that our thoughts can be thought of this like a fundamental, some sort of a glider or some sort of a fundamental computation that supports it, and then we can actually the forms that shapes takes place can culminate and emerge into different concepts, different rules, things that we cannot predict. It's like a computation. So in some sense, you can think it has like a mind of its own. So just very loosely speaking. So yeah.
I'm curious. You mentioned mind of its own. I was thinking earlier. You asked me like, do I think that languages are alive? And now I'm realizing there's a different meaning to that. Do you think languages are life forms?
I do. I think I think the question will also be, are the critters on the Game of Life board, are they life forms? I think they might be similar. There are these, I like this word I mentioned earlier, spontaneities, that I came across in looking up some religious text. And I like that term because it's sort of a thing, an entity, but it's spontaneous in a sense. Is our brain like a substrate, like the Game of Life, and it supports these gliders and glider guns and critters and all these sort of things? Is language like that? Are the words alive?
Actually, it's kind of funny, though, that you mentioned, though, that you were looking at a religious text. And it's strange because there's something inherently related about religion, language, and life, in that if you think like Esselang's even, the Rosetta Stone, if you will, of almost all languages, the most translated piece of text
Lord's Prayer.
is the Lord's Prayer,
Yeah.
right? Our Father who art in heaven. Where's that connection coming from? Like, why is it that every religion is so intertwined with language?
I was thinking about prayers like Lord's Prayer, and is this a very highly evolved prompt, essentially, right? Because if we look at it from one point of view, well, there's not that much content, but maybe this is actually over millennia evolved to be a very compressed prompt that actually might be organizing our brain in a way that we don't consciously understand.
Yeah, it is like a higher form that affects the lower forms that has built it. So, for example, like I can think about scratching my skin, and I'm affecting the cells. Some of them can be dead cells; they are coming off. Some could be live. So again, like it's same thing with thoughts. We are thinking about it, and then it has taken a form, and depending how important and impactful it will take hold in different minds. It's like a virus, it's like a bacteria that has its own life, and the philosophy about it would change, but it has its own structure that is using minds as a substrate to harvest itself and grow and spread. And yeah, so that's with the religion. So it has some religions like has had a longevity, it found hold in many minds, and some religions like lives like a recess in fewer minds, so it's fighting for its space in the substrate of mind across like the population.
But what about the myths regarding language?
What about them?
Well, it reminds me just
Babel.
what you were saying there, because I want to get to that, but it just reminded me real quick of this idea, this pattern in the game of life called the acorn,
Okay.
Yeah.
which is like incredibly simple, and then it just spawns this enormous complexity. Do things like Lord's Prayer, and does that spawn, an entire sort of, complex reality from a really small seed? And maybe this goes back to the Enki and the Namsha. You want to bring that up?
I'll let you bring it up. You're the expert.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Well, it's this idea of a sort of a linguistic program. It might be the opposite of the acorn, in that it's a compact poem in Sumerian, and kind of like a tongue twister. If we were actually to read and internalize this poem in Sumerian, we would no longer be able to understand language itself, like the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And this mythological character Enki, he was responsible for these things called the maze. It looks like the word me, and I think of these as like programs, right? And some of the programs were how to bake bread, or how to run a kingdom, or how to create a family. And I imagine a certain choreographed song and dance you could do, such that when you were done, you had bread in front of you, right? And you don't really understand the process of making bread, but you put your 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You do this sort of hokey pokey, and in going from the wheat to the grain to the processing, you end up with bread. And that's a very complex recipe that maybe you could encode as a poem or a song. Songs are really easy to remember, and it's very important the next generation knows how to make bread. And so I wonder if these ancient Sumerian poems were essentially something like programmings, and Enki would have been the GitHub repository for these sort of code.
I think, before, I don't know much about how computation was carried in terms of the computers we had, but people had an understanding about, in terms of some sort of a software that we ran, and if we could affect enough, we could change the society. So people did think about poems and poetries, and things about dancing, things about synchronization, the feeling of belonging as a tribe, because before we had societies, we lived as a tribe. So we gathered as a tribe, and probably like tribe leaders sought after what unifies us, what would keep us together, and probably like computation that is commonly ran among us would unify us. That has its own whole, own meaning, like that we are unified by the meaning, even though we are different from looks and we can have special skills. So that fundamental thing actually, like when tribes started coming together, kingdoms start to hold, things like that. So more complex thing arose from that, I'm not an historian and expert to really go down to
Well, I
piece
know-
by piece, but I think it has its meaning in terms of like people, ancient Sumerians definitely thought like we can use the power of language to harness unition, and there's more to be done like because of emergence and emergent theory where the system is more than sum of its parts.
So you were mentioning, though, a second ago that it was used to convey things that are so important and that things could emerge from that. And before that, we were talking about cellular automaton reproducing, and I was thinking about a certain thing with neural cellular automaton lizards, and I was wondering if language is self-healing.
Well, you got to explain the lizard thing. I know you both did a lot of work on that. Explain the idea of a pattern that can repair itself.
So we are actually a pattern of ourselves that could repair ourselves. So when you get cut, it can repair.
Like a lizard can grow its tail back.
Like a lizard could grow its tail back. Now you would think about there is some sort of program that's running. How does it know that the shape of the tail should be slender? Why not grow an arm in that place? What guides that? So there is some sort of program running that kind of gives it a memory of how the parts are stored.
Alan Turing worked on this.
Alan Turing worked on this, and he highlighted this concept called morphogenes. Before even DNA was there, genetics was discovered. Genetics was done by Gregor Mendel. So there are some aspects.
And that was more heredity.
Yeah, that's heredity, but not like the Francis and Watson Crick model of the DNA was not already there and not that detailed. So
It's interesting. Schrodinger kind of predicted it a bit.
okay,
Yeah.
I did not know that part, but that's very cool. So in his mind, when Alan Turing was working on that, like he found out that there are certain fundamental elements that could be interacting in terms of a reaction and diffusion model, where they are reacting and then they are also diffusing out, and that controls the dynamical system where one is competing for its existence with the other. And when one is diminishing, and another could be like pronounced in its expression, and
So this
it can suppress. So when you go through a cycle of that, like with similar simple fundamental rules, you can see a pattern emerging. And even if you like take a wipe and like distort that computation, which you put by representing binaries and bits to represent this color or that color, if you nudge them a bit, it will again rearrange to form a zebra fish pattern or some other pattern. So there is like a pattern. Self-healing is a very complex form of a dynamical system that is kind of finding its own attractor. So you could think about the lizard tail is like its attractor state. Even if you chop it, it's going to like find its own pattern to that.
So as to your question, is language like this?
Yeah.
Right?
Is
Is
language
choose its
healing?
own form as it evolves?
Is language
Is it
healing?
self-healing,
That's
or does it explode, or does it disappear? Right? Enki would indicate that language can disappear altogether.
Go extinct in a sense.
Yeah.
Right. Can we resurrect it?
And would it normally self-heal? Like, what does it take for a language to go extinct? Is it like Game of Life, which is very easy to go extinct? Or is it like the lizards, which are very hard?
And if we resurrect, say, ancient Sumerian, are we then subject to the linguistic viruses that are in its mythology?
And will, once we get it to us, like a little bit resurrected, will it actually grow back into its full form? What do you guys think? What do you think?
I think it's a great question. I think it might.
it might.
It reminds me like in the movie The Mummy kind of thing, and they get the books and it sort of resurrects a bunch of characters.
It all depends on a lot of other things. Like again, for a virus to survive, it needs the substrate. For a complex language to survive, it would need a mind that would appreciate or be a very like a beholder of that culture.
Well, what about an A100, right? What about a
A100?
GPU, right?
GPU,
Could
yes.
a GPU, could the language model resurrect Sumerian?
So again, the question back is that even if a GPU were to resurrect a language versus a human mind were to resurrect the language, what are we missing out in a human mind compared to a A100 GPU? The question is there. And then like you need to think about what its resurrection would look like. So, for example, Sanskrit is language that was the foundational to existed in before many years ago, before even Buddha existed.
Well,
So
Sanskrit is the writing mechanism.
yeah, writing mechanism, and it was also a spoken thing.
Yeah, it was a spoken language.
It has many terms that got reincorporated in Hindi. The whole writing system looks similar, but the resurrection is a very different aspect. And for example, like Vedana is like sorrow in Hindi as a word. In Sanskrit, which actually meant sensation. So things actually change, like how they are going to get resurrected and how it would mean. So even if you resurrect it, the resurrected host might not recognize itself from.
Right.
It
So,
might
like-
have its form and look like it's there, but it could be a complete abomination or a very more rich.
Kind of like in English, when we talk about our feelings, we don't really mean the feeling of something. We kind of tend to mean our emotional state. Right?
Yeah, emotional state, exactly. So that's just one instance I learned in a meditation center where how language got changed, but there could be many other aspects.
So, an idea I had a long time ago was, how could you write a book such that if you only wrote the first half, it could finish the second half on its own?
And that the second half is meaningful.
Yeah, it's meaningful,
And
exactly.
the second half is
Do you
meaningful.
think we're kind of getting that kind of book with a language model? Is sort of the seed, the acorn, if you will, of an LLM? Can it get it to continue its own story?
It does in a way that sounds like a baby, almost repeats itself over and over. So it has that mechanism, but I think what we are missing is what's his name? The tiling system developed by
Penrose.
Roger Penrose, where the elements are simple, but you can get infinitely rich patterns.
The aperiodic tiling.
The aperiodic that never repeats itself. So we need to find out where we are missing that tiling in a language model, like why it's like finding its attractor. So we need to nudge its attractor to recycle itself in a baby-like knowns architecture to make it like inspirational, found its ways in swimming to waters that we haven't thought of. What's a thought like that is not thought ever of? So
But Penrose tilings aren't unique. I don't think so. Am I wrong?
I don't remember.
I think
if you
the
have
patterns
set of
don't
tiles-
repeat itself. That's
They,
what I'm
they
saying.
don't repeat. You
They're-
can
they're-
infinitely tile, and you can never repeat if you infinitely tile. But there's not one unique way for any given set of tiles, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I think in that sense, like what I'm saying, that you have your fundamental concepts of the thought that forms the language would be same, but you're using to express different expression, which could be like a pattern that has occurred before.
But it's not necessarily determined. Like there's not one way.
Yeah, we don't need a one way. We are looking for, can it finish the book? And we don't want it to finish the rest of the book in one way. It can have different endings to the
Like a
book.
choose your own adventure.
Choose your own
Yeah.
adventure.
But wouldn't we want to know if there was like a book in a language that's the LLM, like not something that the LLM is reproducing that it's seen before,
Right.
but if there is something that ideally across LLMs, but even within the same one, would always reproduce the same content.
Oh, that's almost like a quine in a sense, right?
No, not
Analogous
reproduce
to-
the first half.
No, I know. Analogous to, though. It's like it would go to the same attractor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where there's something inherent about the first half and the language.
Okay,
That would
so
cause the
so
second
you
half
want
to be
it
the same.
to be constrained, not a very random repetition and random aperiodic. So there's like a constraint you want to, and I think one of the thing that physics is about. I don't know who coded this. It's called physics is the study of symmetries, and symmetries are patterns.
Emily Noether.
Yeah, Emily Noether. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I think what you are trying to referring to is like instead of so you're picking up on a very high level symmetry. Like I want that symmetry to take hold in this pattern. So it's up to you how you choose like to constrain that, and you have to think about like yes, there could be some languages that has more symmetries that are guiding it, like the conlangs. What are the symmetries? I don't know. It could take you from the common, the triangle or the discrete symmetries that you look in mathematics book. You could end up in other, like, where the symmetries are partial. It does not complete each other. Some dies into its own nonlinear channels. But I think there are, like, what you are essentially saying, that there is something like in the essence of the first half of the meaning, and which is going to match.
It's like
with
the lizard tail. It's in the form.
It's in the
to make
form.
that tail.
So if you want to quantify that, it has to come in a meaning that is symmetry. Like, otherwise it's random.
Lizard T.
So you have to choose what symmetry you want, what constraint you want to see the pattern to match. You don't want this randomness, but which randomness you want.
But if you
like the temperature.
that randomness makes sense to you. It might not make sense to someone else, but it makes sense to you that you're matching this.
But if you were to complete this sentence, there would be an infinite number of
Endings.
The beginnings,
Possibilities.
endlessness,
infinite number of endless.
Continuations. right?
Continuations. Now, some of those things have the same meaning. Why would you use endings, continuations, etc.?
Right. They're approximately the same sentence.
But why wouldn't you say letters or words?
I
that
said
you would-
endlessness.
See, that's the temperature setting, right? Need more creativity.
I fell off from the logic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wonder if it was Soul Ray Soul though.
Yeah.
I had to bring it back to Soul Ray Soul, where we don't have, right, those synsets are all one word. Would it always have the same outcome?
Well, I'd love to see how this conversation would continue, and hopefully, like the Penrose tiles, it would go on forever and never repeat.
Yep.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much
Look
for
forward to
having me
speaking
in
to you
the
again.
impromptu interview, but it's an absolute delight to be reunited with my old lab cult, so to speak. that harbors new ways of thinking that has never been discussed before. So again, it was journey. We did not prepare. We did not think what you're thinking about, but we always try to end up with common ground. So it was a very delightful evening.
Pleasure.
Yeah, conversation theory. Read it.
Thanks again. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.